So I'm going to get started. I have 4 o'clock, so I just want to say thank you so much for taking your day to listen to this healthy lecture. This is the last one of 2020. I can't believe it. Actually, I'm kind of glad we're at the last month of 2020. I'm hoping for a brighter 2021. So I wanted to talk about, what is a healthy diet? It seems like, we're throwing that term around so, haphazardly. So we're going to talk about what actually constitutes a healthy versus unhealthy diet, and actually discuss a little bit about how foods affect your health. We're going to give some tips on choosing a variety of wholesome foods for health. And really, the goal for today's lecture is to stimulate dialogue and thought about your own diet and give you information on how to make changes towards healthy eating, increase physical activity, and engaging in a healthier lifestyle to raise the quality and longevity of your life. Hippocrates did say, let food be thy medicine. And that's so true because, what we're putting into our body is either affecting our health adversely or positively. So I always like to give some statistics, but believe it or not, about half of all American adults have one or more preventable chronic diseases. Back in the 1800s and early 1900s, we were really afraid of infectious disease. Well, now our problem are chronic diseases like diabetes and cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure. We're seeing a rise in liver disease like non alcoholic fatty liver disease. We're seeing kidney disease. I can't even tell you how many kidney transplant patients I've been seeing. Cancers are not going away. As a matter of fact, unusual cancers seem to be increasing. We've got increased poor bone health like osteoporosis, and of course, overweight and obesity is through the roof. So, what's really sad about this is that many of these conditions are preventable. Now, I wanted to give you some good news, bad news too. The good news is we are living longer, especially in the United States. The average lifespan of an American is now about 78 years old, although, we have patients and members and friends of mine that are in their 90s and even 101. So we are living longer. But the bad news is, unfortunately, the chronic diseases are increasing. So heart disease and cancer is still the number 1 and 2 killers of the Americans. And then, of course, we have all these other things, now the infectious diseases, influenza, COVID. We've got, unfortunately, brain issues like Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's. Again, we've got those GI diseases like liver disease, etc. So I wanted to show you. This is actually a survey conducted by the Global Burden of Disease, and it's a study that looks at basically what are the eating habits of the world. So it's kind of color coded, which is nice. So when you look at here, when we're looking at North America, what is our diet like? Well, our diet is actually very low in fruits, vegetables, and legumes, and whole grains, and even nuts and seeds, and we're extremely high in the saturated fats. Oops, sorry. In the sugars, in the sodiums, in the trans fats. So that's what this huge red line is all about. We eat a lot of processed foods and processed meats like deli meats. So as you can see, when you do a comparative, we're pretty off the scale with unhealthy diets. And then when you look specifically too at the American guidelines, about 3/4 of Americans have an eating pattern that is low in vegetables, fruits, dairy, and even some of the good oils. And more than half of the Americans are meeting or exceeding total grain and total protein foods. Most Americans exceed the recommended for added sugars, saturated fats, and sodium. So that's why we're going to hone in on that. And we Americans are just eating way too many calories, and the calories are coming in the way of snacking. Bye bye are those days of 3 meals a day. We're eating all day. We're snacking, we're grazing, we're picking, we're noshing, and those all add up to calories by the end of the day. Now, there are so many credible resources out there. When you get on the internet, you just have to really be careful what you read. Even if things are written by doctors or testimonies, just be careful. There's a lot of stuff out there that's not true. You want to make sure that it's supported through the research. One really great resource is always the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. This is actually the professional association that governs my profession as a dietitian. The American Heart Association, they just have so many great resources. The American Institute for Cancer and Cancer Research, National Institutes of Health, of course, the CDC, American Diabetes Association. So there are lots of really great places to get information, get recipes, get books, get pamphlets. So, always go to those sources first, the professional organizations, to get your information. So you guys probably know that there are dietary guidelines that are written every 5 years. So we're actually coming up to the end of our cycle of 2020. So 2015 to 2020. So the guidelines are expiring. We are going to be getting new guidelines, but what are they saying? What should we do? Well, they're saying follow a healthy eating pattern across the lifespan. And that kind of makes sense. We shouldn't be eating the same way at 50 years old as we did at 30 years old. We're just in a different place. We should focus on a variety of nutrient dense, which I'm going to explain in a minute, and the amount. We need to limit our calories from sugars and saturated fats, and we definitely need to reduce our sodium. We need to shift to healthier food and beverage choices. We're very blessed to be living in the United States. We have so many choices in the supermarkets. I think it's, a double-edged sword though, just because sometimes it gets confusing and the marketing is so wonderful. You think you're drinking or eating something healthy when in essence you're really not. So we're going to talk about, what to look for in a food label. And we need to support healthy eating patterns for all. In other words, we need support. If we're trying to eat healthy and yet everything around us is unhealthy, it's challenging. It definitely is. So the other thing I wanted to add to that list is, what is nutrient dense food? Well, nutrient dense food, here's just a perfect picture of it. Nutrient dense food would be food that has a lot of nutrients like vitamins, minerals, fiber, maybe protein, good fats, compared to something that, is more processed. So when you look at these two pictures, this little tiny muffin is 200 calories and this whole plate of broccoli is 200 calories. So calorie for calorie, you're getting a lot more good stuff, obviously, from the broccoli. Okay, it might not taste as fun as the muffin. Doesn't mean you can't have muffins, but we should be choosing more foods in this category than we should in this category. The other chart I wanted to show you is these are all the things that we as human beings need on a daily basis. So we need carbohydrates. For those of us that are following a low carb diet, that could be okay. You can't go on a zero carb diet because carbohydrates are necessary for so many functions of the body. It preserves muscle mass, it keeps your intestines healthy, it keeps your blood sugar healthy. It's just that sometimes we're not picking the right carbohydrates. You're always hearing about choose complex carbohydrates over simple carbohydrates. A complex carbohydrate would be things like fruits, vegetables, whole grains, things that have more nutrient density as opposed to sugars, things, with white sugar or desserts or processed, sweets and things like that. The other thing we need are fats. Now, for those of us following a low fat diet, that could be okay too, but you can't go on a zero fat diet because we need the omega 3s and the omega 6s. That's what's necessary for our heart health. It's necessary for our cells of the body. It's necessary for hormones. But again, the problem is we're eating more of the bad fats, the saturated fats and the trans fats. Then we've got proteins, and not all proteins are created equal. So a lot of us are following a high protein diet. Proteins are made up of something called amino acids, and we've got 20 of them. And some of them the body can make, like these, the indispensable amino acids the body can make, but only if we get enough of the indispensable amino acids. In the past, they used to call them complete proteins or incomplete proteins. We don't really call it that anymore. So you might want to think about, where do we get these indispensable amino acids from? Well, those are found in mainly animal products. So if you're eating lean proteins like eggs or seafood, shellfish, lean poultry, you're getting all of these indispensable amino acids in order to make these dispensable amino acids. And some of you might be thinking, all right, but Lil, I want to follow a plant-based diet. So if you're following a plant-based diet, all that means is that the bulk of your nutrition is coming from plants. But if you are including some animal products in, you don't have to worry because you're getting indispensable amino acids from that. But if you're on a vegan diet, now that's different. If you're on a vegan diet, there are only two plant products that really contain all of these indispensable amino acids, and that would be soy and soybean and anything related to soy, like tofu and tofu products, and quinoa. So those two plant products actually contain all the indispensable amino acids necessary for your health to make the dispensable amino acids. So the other way you can do it is if you're a vegan, what you would have to do is a lot of complementary pairing. In other words, you might get, beans and rice, or you might get fruit and vegetables, things like that. You have to do combinations in order to get all these amino acids. Because here's the point. If you don't get enough amino acids, you can't make proteins. And everything inside and outside of your body is a protein. Your hormones, your neurotransmitters, your heart, your skin cells, your hair, everything is a protein. So if you're not supplying your body with enough building blocks to make the protein, something is going to suffer. Now, these vitamins are also necessary for our health. And what's really unique about the human body is that we don't make a lot of vitamins. We actually have to eat them. We have to get them from our food source. We can make a few of them, like vitamin K. We can make that. Niacin we can make as long as you're getting enough tryptophan. Um, that's pretty much it. B12 you can store, so that's good. You don't Our body doesn't make any vitamin C. Our body makes vitamin K. Our body can make vitamin D. So there are a couple that we can make, but even if we make them, they have to be in adequate amounts. And adequate amounts are always based on our gender and our age. And the same thing with these minerals as well. So these are things that are necessary for our health. What do they do? All these vitamins and minerals have very specific roles in our body. Like iron, it makes red blood cells, it makes, hemoglobin, so we can not have anemia. Vitamin A is necessary for our eyesight. Vitamin D is necessary for immunity and strong bones. So every single one of these things plays a function in the body. And of course, we can't forget water. Water or some sort of fluid intake to make sure that we stay hydrated. As human beings, we are about 60% water. So if we don't get enough fluid intake, that can also hurt our health as well. Now, the other question that a lot of my patients and clients say to me is, do calories mean anything? I'm trying to either maintain my weight or lose weight. The calories in, calories out equation, does that really apply? And it does. The problem is when you look at charts like this mean nothing to me as a nutritionist. These are just charts that are giving you, average intakes. Like, so for example, I'm 53 years old and it's saying that I should be having about, I would say I'm moderately active. I should have about 1800 calories. I can tell you right now that if I eat 1800 calories, I'm going to gain weight because there's so many things that dictate how I use these calories. I have a thyroid disorder. I have postmenopausal, so I have conditions where if I ate 1800 calories, I'm going to gain weight. So that's why these are just general guidelines. The best thing to do is you got to calculate your calories. And this is just a cheat sheet of how we would do it as a nutritionist. Believe me, we have more complicated ways to do it, but I just wanted to show you a simplistic way to figure out your calorie intake. So I just gave an example. Just say somebody's 150 pounds. I converted it to kilograms because everything's in the metric system in the medical field. And if I wanted to lose weight, I multiply it by 20 calories. So that would mean I would need 1364. So as you can see, I kind of gave an example of me. So if I wanted to maintain 150 pounds, I would need 1,364 calories. If I want to maintain my weight, and I'm, semi-active, I'd get about 1700. And if I wanted to gain weight, I'd multiply it either by 30 or 40. It depends on my condition. So if I was very sick, if I had cancer, if I was, had some sort of wasting disease, I'd probably go up to about 40 calories. So this is just a better way to kind of calculate you as a human being, as an individual. Where do I start with my calories? So, again, just kind of use this, with a grain of salt, just kind of calculate what your calories might be based on what your goals are. So, how would I actually get those calories? Well, we do want a variety of foods. Now, certainly, if we have philosophical reasons for not eating dairy or meat, that's okay. But you got to look at all the different food groups. So, starches, preferably complex starches, like things like whole grains or legumes. Or starchy vegetables like butternut squash or peas or corn, non GMO corn. um, if you are following a 1200 calorie diet, you need about 5 servings of starch per day, 1500, 6 servings, etc. So you can kind of read the chart. Now, fruit is interesting. Fruit is healthy for us, absolutely. But some of us eat way too much fruit. And remember, fruit does have fructose in it, which is a type of simple sugar. And fructose overall isn't all that healthy for us. So if you're going to do fruit, you always want to, have a variety of fruits. I always choose the low glycemic index fruits first, like berries, just because they're nutrient dense and they have less sugar. And then my second choice is I always go for a fruit that has a skin, the apples, the pears, the peaches, nectarines, things like that, just because you'll get extra fiber from that. And the fiber slows down the digestion of the sugar. Doesn't mean you can't have watermelon and melons and things like that, but not all fruit is created equal either. And as you can see, as the calories go up, the fruit really doesn't surpass 4 servings a day. And we in the dietetic world kind of agree with that just because of the fructose. I have a patient, she had lots of fruit trees in her backyard, and she was eating so many mangoes and papayas, and it was contributing to her worsening diabetes. So even though she's like, well, Lil, it's not like I'm sitting there having a hot fudge sundae. I'm having, papayas and mangoes from my garden. It was just way too much fructose for her, and it was actually causing harm. She was actually getting something called fatty liver because excessive fruit, whether it's excessive fruit or excessive fructose from other sources, can actually go to the liver and harm it. Now, vegetables are a different story, non-starchy vegetables. Even though the 1200 calorie only has 3 servings, I don't really go by that. I think when it comes to vegetables, go crazy. Have as much as you physically can tolerate, unless you have some sort of issue, like, if you have ulcerative colitis, if you have irritable bowel, sometimes vegetables are pretty hard to tolerate. But if you don't have any of those issues, vegetables, the more you can add in, the better. And again, not all vegetables are created equal. I think one of the best sources of vegetables would be the green leafy vegetables. The green leafy vegetables have all those pigments. It has chlorophyll, it has vitamin A, it has xanthins in them. It has so many different components that are really, really healthy for our heart. They're cancer preventative. It has fiber, so it helps keep your gut healthy. So vegetables are high on the list. Now, dairy products, as you can see, we don't exceed 4 servings of dairy either. Now, dairy can be a good source of protein, but again, it also has a simple sugar in it. It has something called lactose in it. So it's not something that you want to overdo as well. And remember, when you choose dairy products, dairy also is a combination of fat, depending upon what percentage of milk or product you buy. So if you're doing, I really don't know too many people that do whole milk anymore, except if you have little kids. But if you're going to do dairy, you need to keep it lean, 1% skim milk, fat free. That's pretty important. Now, this meat serving here, and this, it just says meat, but this includes poultry and seafood and shellfish and things like that. These numbers again correspond to the serving size. So this would mean a serving size of meat or poultry is 1 ounce. So that means somebody on a 1200 calorie diet should really be restricting their animal protein to about 5 ounces. 6 ounces for a 1500 calorie diet, and about 7 ounces for the higher calories. So as you can see, we're not telling you to go have a 12-ounce porterhouse steak. There's nowhere on the guideline that says that. So it just goes to show that, when we go out to eat, the portions are pretty high. The serving sizes are high. So we definitely need to scale that back a bit. And then when it comes to fat, these again are fat servings about 4, 5, 6, and 7, based on your calorie intake. And we prefer the good fats. It doesn't mean you can never have any saturated fat, especially if you eat animal proteins, but you want to get the bulk of your fat from plant bases like olive oil, canola oil, walnut oil, avocado oil, nuts, seeds, things like that. So I just wanted to also remind you about what portion sizes are because that's also very confusing. You have to remember that when you pick up a product and you read a food label, those serving sizes are not based on portion sizes. So if it says, pasta, one serving is 2 ounces, well, when you cook 2 ounces of pasta, that's going to come out to be a very big serving. So these would be the serving sizes that constitute what we were talking about on the other chart. So if you're going to do fruit, now I said I do berries. So berries, you can actually have about 3/4 of a cup. That would be considered one serving of fruit. Or if you had, an apple or a pear, it would have to be a medium size, like about the size of a tennis ball. And as you can see, when we go to the supermarket, you've got some apples that look like, they're huge, they're too big. So try to have fruit that's about the size of a tennis ball. If you're going to do juice, remember, count juice as a fruit serving, and it's only half a cup. That's 4 ounces. So I don't know about you, but when I go to the diner and I'm ordering juice, they're giving me at least 12 ounces. So that's 3 servings. That's a lot. So I'm already over the amount of fruit I'm supposed to have for that day. So as you can see, we really, really sabotage ourselves by having too much juice. So be careful with that. The vegetables, again, go crazy. 1 cup is one serving if it's raw, half a cup if it's cooked, and then half a cup if it's a vegetable juice. And then grains, this is where we get into trouble too, because we like our carbohydrates, we like our starches. One slice of bread should be about 1 ounce. But what's interesting is that the food industry has already sabotaged us because I'm telling you, pick up bread in the supermarket and look to see how many ounces that slice is. And on average, the slice is 1.5 ounces. So if I have a sandwich, that's already 3 servings. So it's a lot. So we're actually eating way more than we really intended to. If you're doing any kind of rice or pasta, about half a cup is one serving. If you're doing cereal, about 1 ounce. Same thing with beans and nuts. Nuts, I see a lot of my clients and patients go crazy with nuts. They really do. We like nuts, but they are triggers. They're easy to eat. You might have it in a bowl. You might be playing cards and you're just eating too many nuts. A serving of nut is only a third of a cup. It's not much. That might equate to about 22 almonds, so it really isn't much. If you're doing pistachios and you're opening them, you can actually have a couple more. I think it's like 42. So, be careful with the nuts. Even though they're healthy, they're very, very high in fat and calories, and you could be overdoing it. Same thing with peanut butter. One serving is only 2 tablespoons. I actually have a patient that would eat a whole jar of peanut butter. He would sit there with a spoon and eat a whole jar. That was way too much fat. The dairy and eggs, so 1 cup of milk or yogurt is one serving, 1.5 ounces of cheese, 2 ounces of processed cheese, or one whole egg is actually considered a serving. And then, like I said, the meats we talked about. This is just a little chart to give you, just a little guide on how to do things just because a lot of us aren't going to start bringing measuring cups to our restaurants, right? But you want to do a lot of visual assessments. I don't usually use the palm of your hand just because everybody's palm is different. So that's why I like to use these sort of things. So 3 ounces is about a deck of cards, quarter of a cup, about an egg, half a cup, about a computer mouse, 3/4 of a cup tennis ball, and 1 cup of baseball. 2 teaspoons, about a ping pong ball. So just to give you a visual, if your goal is to actually lose weight, really the best thing to do is measure things out, at least in the beginning, just so you have a really good understanding about what you're eating and how much you're eating. And then maybe use different calibrated, like Gladware and different Tupperware that's smaller, so you can actually have smaller amounts. But a lot of us, we think we're eating smaller amounts, but we're really not. When you actually start measuring things, you'd be surprised. The other technique that we can use too is just look at your plate. So this is kind of nice, where it says, all right, so fill 1/4 with some sort of lean protein. Of course, this is a 9-inch plate, not one of those big gourmet fancy plates. Fill 1/4 with a whole grain or starchy vegetable. And this one always makes me smile because I'm married to an Italian. So, you know, it's like this whole plate is going to be filled with pasta, right? But I don't want to do that. You should really be using pasta as a side dish. And then, of course, fill half with the non-starchy vegetables. So this is just a way that you can kind of do a visual on your own plate and practice your portion control yourself. You're going to decrease calories this way. You're going to of these starches. So I think that could be a good technique. I do want to pay some attention to sugar just because we Americans eat so much of it. So when you look at the guidelines, where is the bulk of the sugar intake coming from? It's actually coming from our beverages, believe it or not. So we are drinking a lot of our sugar. When you look at this statistic too, Americans eat the equivalent to 52 teaspoons of sugar per day. And when you do the math, I have my calculator here, 52 times 16 calories is 832 calories. That's just from sugar. And I can definitely attest that a lot of my patients, because this is what I do for a living, I'm listening to what everybody eats and drinks. And I can tell you that we are drinking a lot of sugar and we're not even knowing it. We're not even realizing it as much as we should. Plus, the fact that a lot of food products just have a lot of added sugars in them. I'm really happy that now the food labels will tell you added sugar. So that's good. Our snacks and sweets, that's second in line to where we're getting all our sugar because we really like our sweets. Vegetables are very low in sugar, so another good reason to eat your vegetables. Grains are pretty good. Dairy is about 4%, mixed dishes. So really start looking at your beverages. Even something like this that I wanted to show you, 250 milliliters, 8 ounces of orange juice, so you're thinking, Lil, it's orange juice. It's got to be healthy, right? It's got 23 grams of sugar, 23 grams. And remember that 8 ounces is actually 2 servings of fruit. So if you're following a 1200 calorie diet and you're only supposed to have 2 servings of fruit and you have 8 ounces of orange juice, you're done for the day for your fruit. So if you decide that you want to have an apple or some grapes later, now you're overdoing it. And this is what I'm saying, how easy it is for us to overdo our diet. Now, what are the guidelines? Well, the American Heart Association recommends limiting sweeteners to no more than 6 teaspoons if you're a woman and no more than 9 teaspoons for men. And I found it very interesting that the American Heart Association would actually focus on sugar. When you think about heart health, you're thinking about fat. We know that too much fat hurts your heart. So, why is the American Heart Association talking about sugar? Well, we also know that too much sugar actually raises your triglycerides, and your triglycerides are part of that lipid panel. And if you raise triglycerides, that can harm your heart. So, it's pretty interesting that they actually got involved with making recommendations for sugar. Um, you know, I think maybe one place to start with this is if you do add sugar to your coffee or your tea, maybe you can start scaling back. I have a client, she was putting, no joke, she has about 4 teaspoons of sugar in her coffee, but she drinks like 5 cups of coffee a day. So do the math. That's a lot of sugar. So she just started by cutting it in half. She did 2 teaspoons until she got used to the flavor of it not being as sweet. And now she's to the point where she doesn't even do sugar at all. Now it's too sweet if she puts any sugar in it. So your tastes will change and they will accommodate. Now, the World Health Organization also gets involved with telling us how much sugar, and they say about 5% of your calories coming from sugar, which is not much. The American guidelines actually say 10%, but the World Health Organization also recognizes that sugar just really isn't so hot for our health. So 5% is pretty low. So you've got to read your food labels. What I try to encourage my patients to do and my clients to do is read the food labels and try to pick products that have no more than 5 grams of sugar per serving. Certainly, that does depend on what you're picking. But say, for example, you're picking a salad dressing. Why should your salad dressing have 12 sugar? That's just ridiculous. Why should your yogurt have 23 grams of sugar in it? You might as well have a bowl of ice cream for that matter, right? So you really have to start reading the labels, and hopefully you can start getting rid of some of the sugar that's found in foods that really shouldn't have so much sugar in them. Now, not all sugar is created equal either. I put an order in which I think are the healthiest forms of sugar if you're going to have it. I think maple syrup is probably the most healthiest form of sugar just because the ratio of glucose and fructose as well. Also, maple syrup, of course, 100%. I'm not talking about the processed stuff, but 100% maple syrup also has vitamins and minerals. It has iron, so it's pretty healthy for us. Although I know that it's got a strong flavor and a lot of people don't want to put maple syrup in their coffee, so I get that. The next choice might be some raw cane sugar, just because it's not processed with all the chlorines, the demerara sugar, the muscovado sugar, turbinado sugar. So all these look brown. Um, and it doesn't mean it's brown sugar. Don't buy brown sugar. Brown sugar is actually white sugar with molasses baked into it. These products, raw, demerara, muscovado, turbinado, those are naturally brown. Honey, I didn't put that on the top of my list just because it does actually have a high percentage of fructose. So you still want to be careful of your honey. You are getting some nutrients from it, of course. Coconut sugar, palm sugar, these are, those are not as popular, but they're out there too. I want you to avoid high fructose corn syrup the best you can. And the only way to really avoid that is read your food labels, read the ingredient list, make sure it doesn't have trans fats in it, make sure it doesn't have high fructose corn syrup in it. High fructose corn syrup is just really bad for us. And the food industry uses it because it's a really cheap sweetener. What they do is they take corn syrup, a beautiful corn syrup, they manipulate it in the laboratory and they make it super, super sweet so the food industry doesn't have to use that much of it. Unfortunately, the body really doesn't know what to do with it. And when the body doesn't know what to do with something, it's going to store it. It's either going to put it in the liver or put it in fat cells. So high fructose corn syrup will go to both. So not very healthy for us. I'm not too keen on agave, I have to say. And the reason why I'm not keen on agave is because it's almost 100% fructose. And I'm nervous about the fructose because fructose goes right to the liver. And if you have any sort of diabetes, you have um, fatty liver disease, if you have high cholesterol, anything that affects the liver, and you're going to overtax it with agave, it's probably not the healthiest thing. I'm really not into the processed granulated sugar either. It's too much processing, too much chlorine, just not so healthy for us. And that means the white sugar, sugar cubes, powdered sugar, pearled sugar, all this stuff that all falls into that processed granulated sugar component. And then I put a question mark with sugar substitutes. Now, sugar substitutes are things like Equal, Splenda, Sweet and Low, things like that. So they're controversial for sure. Now, are they giving you calories? No. So if you're on a diet and you're trying to reduce your calorie intake and your sugar intake, you might say, well, I'm going to have some sugar substitute. But then on the flip side of it, there is some research to show that it might actually be instigating your hunger. There are some sugar substitutes that instigate migraines, like Equal or a NutraSweet. Um, jury's out on if we should be eating high levels of Sweet and Low because of stomach cancer. So, they are processed man-made items. So you might want to consider limiting them. The other thing, but let me go back. The one thing that I didn't list on here are sugar alcohols. Now, another thing hot on the market now is something called xylitol, erythritol, and those are lower calorie sugar substitutes. I don't really call them sugar replacers, I would call them. And they give you little calories, so not as much as regular sugar, and they're made from more natural ingredients like grapes and things like that. So they extract them from more natural ingredients. So if you are looking for a lower calorie, lower sugar alternative, you might want to consider the sugar alcohols. The only problem with sugar alcohols is that some people get GI distress from it, almost like they get gassy from it. I'm like one that I can tell you, if I eat too much erythritol, forget it. Now it's like a laxative for me. So that's the one downfall of it. And the other thing I just want to mention too is if you do use xylitol or any of these sugar alcohols, keep them away from your pets. They are extremely toxic to your pets, your dogs and cats. All right, now let's look at sodium. So as you can see here, sodium is crazy. Look how much sodium that we're having. So, these are our men seem to really like sodium, right? So let's see, the age group of about in the 30s here, 4,500 milligrams per day on average. We women, we're high up there too. How much sodium are we supposed to have a day? Well, again, you look at the guidelines from the American Heart Association. If you have high blood pressure, you need to control your sodium. Now, why is that? Water follows sodium. So the more sodium you eat, the more pressure you're going to have in your blood vessels. So if you have high blood pressure and you're eating a lot of sodium, you're hurting yourself. You're hurting your heart and you're hurting your kidneys. So that's why if you have high blood pressure and you're actually being treated with hypertensive medication, keep your sodium intake to no more than 1,500 milligrams per day, which is not hard to do unless you eat a lot of processed foods. If processed foods or canned foods, they're typically going to have a higher amount of sodium because it's a preservative. If you don't have hypertension and you're not being treated because you don't have it, well, it doesn't mean eat 4,500 milligrams because I'm telling you, you keep doing that, you're going to end up with hypertension. So the American Heart Association says for those of us that don't have high blood pressure, you can have about 2,000 milligrams of sodium per day. Sodium is important. It's an electrolyte. We do need it. It balances the fluids in our body. It partakes in different enzymes and different, processes in our body. So we need it. The unfortunate thing is we eat too much of it. So where are we getting all of our sodium from? Well, a lot of these mixed dishes, right? So if we're doing any kind of processed mixed dishes, or we're doing, frozen meals, we're doing pizzas, we're doing things like that, that's going to be very, very high. The next thing would be some of these protein foods, vegetables. Certain vegetables have a higher natural content of sodium, like celery, but I would still want you to eat celery over anything else. Grains. So again, the bulk of our sodium is from our processed foods. And also, if you do put salt on your food, I just wanted you to be aware of how much sodium is actually in your salt. So if, I look at my husband using that salt shaker, it really panics me. I'm like, hon, you got to stop using this salt shaker. A quarter teaspoon of salt is already giving him 575 milligrams of sodium. Now, he doesn't have high blood pressure, but I'm trying to prevent it from happening. A half a teaspoon, over 1,100 milligrams of sodium. 1 teaspoon, 2,300 milligrams of sodium. So imagine that you're already at what you're supposed to have, and then you're eating food that has it. So you're already above. So that's just what I had mentioned. So what are some ideas to reduce your sodium? Well, we want flavorful food. And what's interesting about sodium is that sodium actually instigates hunger. It helps things feel good in the mouth. So that's why we like sodium and salt. So I say replace it with different herbs and spices that aren't salt based. I mean, oh my gosh, putting herbs like fragrant herbs like rosemary and basil and cilantro. Oh my gosh, it really livens up your food. Or spices that aren't mixed spices. Remember, if you do like adobo or, you know, um, like different mixtures, they'll have salt in them. So you have to read the ingredients. But if you're using things like turmeric and curry, oh my gosh, those are really great. It's going to liven up and flavor your food without the salt. You can always use salt replacers. Salt replacers, like Mrs. Dash, that's just a brand name, they actually use potassium instead of sodium. So if you are on a medication that's a potassium sparing blood pressure med, you have to be very careful of these salt replacers because it adds potassium. But what's very interesting is that if you tend to be low potassium, using those salt replacers will help to replenish some of the potassium. Also, limit your intake of processed foods. Just like I said, all processed foods are going to have high amounts of sodium. I picked up one pizza. I think it was a personal pizza. It was one of those small ones, and it had like almost 1,600 milligrams of sodium. And who's going to eat like a quarter of a personal pizza? Nobody's going to do that. You're going to eat the whole darn thing, and it just be careful. Always look at your food labels. Try to do fresh. If you do frozen, that's okay. Canned is okay too. It's just that they will have higher amounts of sodium. So you want to buy the ones that say no salt or low sodium or sodium free. And if you can't find those, just at least rinse them. These are just some terms that some of the food products will have. So if you see something that says sodium free, it's going to have less than 5 milligrams of sodium per serving. So that's going to be good. Very low sodium, I hardly ever see that anymore. I do see reduced sodium. That just means that that product has 25% less sodium compared to the regular. I don't really see light anymore. So I actually see sodium free and I see reduced. So, but read your food labels. Just for a guide, if you decide, hey, look, I don't really cook, Lil, I want to buy like a frozen meal and I want to have that for lunch. Okay, well, think about how much sodium you want to keep in your diet. If you're following 1,500, 1,600, well, then if you're eating 3 meals a day and they're processed, really try to make sure maybe you're looking for a product that has maybe 400 milligrams, 300 or 400 milligrams of sodium. They're out there. There's a lot of choices out there. The other thing I want to show your attention to is the saturated fats. Now, saturated fats we know are not good for us. Saturated fat leads to fatty liver. Saturated fat leads to atherosclerosis. Atherosclerosis leads to heart attacks because now you just clogged up all your arteries. So when you look at how much we're eating, this is in percentages. So let's look at my age group here, almost 12%. And look at women, look at this age group. Well, babies and little kids are supposed to have more fat. So we're going to not talk about them. But, as we get older, we're really supposed to be controlling the saturated fat. It's hard to digest anyway. So where are we getting it from? Again, those mixed dishes. Did you ever see how much saturated fat is in a personal pan pizza? My gosh, it's so much. Dairy products again. So even if you're doing non-fat or fat-free milk, but then you're having a bunch of yogurt and cheese, you're kind of sabotaging yourself. So how much are we supposed to be having in terms of fat in total? Well, the guidelines say we need about 30 to 35% of our calories coming from fat because fat is important. We need it. Why do we need it? Well, it's important for our cells, it's important for our hormones. It's important to keep us warm, keeps us cushioned. So we have to have it. You can't go on a zero, fat diet. But we're eating, as you can see by the statistics, way too much. They also suggest that we should consume less than 10% from saturated fat. So where is saturated fat found? Saturated fat is found mainly in animal products. So if you're eating, even if you ate, if you're eating egg whites are very low in saturated fat because all the fat is in the yolk. Doesn't mean you can never have eggs. Of course you can. But if you're eating, a 3 egg omelet every single day and you're having, other animal products throughout the day, you're probably overdoing it. So this is just more definitions. We want saturated fat less than 10%. Unsaturated fats are the good fats, things that we get from olive oil, canola oil, and things like that. So we want the bulk of that 30% coming from that. Trans fats, get rid of them. There's nothing good about a trans fat. And you're going to find trans fats in things like margarine or things that are processed. So those aren't good for us. And cholesterol, what's interesting is our body makes cholesterol. So if you have high cholesterol and you're eating a lot of cholesterol and you're eating a lot of saturated fat, your cholesterol levels are going to go up. So that's just something to watch out for. What's interesting about cholesterol is no plant products have cholesterol. None of them. Okay, so fruits, vegetables, whole grains, those don't have cholesterol. You're only going to find cholesterol in animal products. So if you do eat animal products, because I do, I'm not a vegan, I try to keep it as lean as possible. And one of the leanest proteins out there are turkey breast and chicken breast. That's like the leanest. white pork if you do eat pork. And then if you do eat red meat, you got to do the good cuts. You got to do the tenderloins and the sirloins, the expensive stuff, just because that's going to have less of the saturated fat. Okay, so this just gives you an example. I wanted to show you this. This is actually a food diary of one of my patients. She said I could show it. I show it several times actually. And this is just to show everybody just how easy it is to add fat to our diet, even if it's the good fat. So this is her lunch menu. She was having a salad. She had tomatoes and broccoli. She put some avocado in there. She used the olive oil and vinegar as the dressing. She had some canned salmon in there. She had some onions in there. So when I calculated it, she was already up to 53 grams of fat. We were trying to decrease, and look at this. This salad was 820 calories. We were trying to keep her on a 1200 calorie diet. So when you're looking at this, these are healthy foods, but what we had to do is we certainly had to manipulate this. So what we did was we reduced the olive oil to 1 tablespoon. I was kind of nice and I kept the avocado for a while. I actually reduced the salmon to 3 ounces. So, we doing this is really helpful just because you can see what you're eating and then you can make modifications. So we actually decreased our fat intake pretty significantly. What are some other ideas? Well, certainly we mentioned them. Definitely go to low-fat dairy. Choose leaner cuts of meat. It doesn't mean every once in a while you can have a porterhouse steak. Of course you can, but you know what? That means you're sacrificing other things that day. Okay. Incorporate more vegetarian meals. Even if you're not a vegan or a vegetarian, that doesn't mean you can't have a vegetarian day. Go for it. Reduce your intake of solid fats like the solid butters and replace it with the nut oils and the olive oils. I know there are some butters out there now that are mixed with canola oil and olive oil, and that would be a good alternative. I would be careful of margarine and those kinds of spreads because those have a lot of trans fats. So you might want to do the ones that are heart healthy, like Benecol and Nature's Balance, lots of different choices out there. You might want to use vinegar instead of oil. I mean, vinegars, my gosh, they have so much flavor. There's so many different types of vinegar, right? Balsamic vinegar, red vinegar, rice wine vinegar. Oh my gosh, the list goes on and on. So you can use those as flavorings and get rid of the fat altogether. And then also prepare foods with broth instead of fat. I have a patient, she would make the most amazing chicken. But what she was doing is she was putting a whole stick of butter on the chicken and she was baking it with that. So instead of doing that, she decreased it to about a couple tablespoons, and then she used broth to baste her chicken instead. And it tasted just as yummy. The other thing I want you to pay attention to also are your eating patterns and snacking habits. And, when you look at what we're doing to our kids these days, we start them really early with this whole snacking behavior, right? Even in school, have a snack, or, oh, you did really good in school, have a snack. Oh, you're screaming, here, have a snack. We're always like snacking. And that's what we Americans like to do. We're sitting in front of the TV, we're snacking, we're playing cards, we're snacking, we're talking to our friends, we're snacking. Oh my gosh, we're just eating all day. So be careful. Not only are we picking, the junky snacks, we'd rather you have a nutrient dense snack and definitely something that's unsalted, but really, really be careful about how many snacks you're doing. The statistics shows that the majority of the US population consumes 3 meals a day plus more than one snack. And I can tell you, being in this field, that is so absolutely true. I have a patient, she has breakfast, lunch, and dinner like clockwork, but in between, I would say let's say she does a snack in between breakfast and lunch. She does another snack between lunch and dinner. And then she does like 3 servings of a snack after dinner, which is like the dangerous zone for many of us because we're relaxing, we're hanging out, we're watching TV, watching a movie, and then we're snacking. So lo and behold, she's already done over 5 servings of snacks per day. That's a lot. That's going to eventually, catch up with her health, and it already has. Also, amongst most age groups, 40 to 50% consume 2 to 3 snacks per day, and about 1/3 consume 4 or more snacks a day. So as you can see, statistically, we're eating a lot. So just think about how many snacks you eat per day. I try to think about that all day because I have to say that I'm a snacker, so I have to be really careful about that. Yeah, I have to think of a snack as a mini meal. So you have to keep snacks calorie controlled. So I'll give you an example because a lot of you like nuts. So I have a client that eats, I'm telling you, about 400 calories just in nuts because he's eating nuts as a snack. So that adds up really quick. So, what could be some things that are under 150 calories? Let's see. Maybe a piece of low fat cheese and a couple slices of apple, or maybe a third of a cup of nuts. You can do that. Or maybe you can get a rice cake, which is like 10 calories, and put, a teaspoon of peanut butter on it. Or maybe you can take a couple of whole grain crackers with, a little bit of low fat cheese. Maybe you can get a small yogurt, or if you do a Greek yogurt, just make sure you have a smaller serving. So there are ways to do it, but you've got to be mindful to do it. If we're just grabbing, that's not going to work. So if you said, well, Lil, I want potato chips, that's what I want. Well, okay, have your potato chips, but don't take the bag with you. You've got to measure it out. Read the food label and say, okay, you know, 10 chips is 150 calories. So guess what? You get 10 chips. You got to make that sacrifice if that's really what you want to do to help your health. All right, so what would be some better choices? Chocolate cake? Yeah, well, I like chocolate and I like cake. So, one way you can handle this is have a smaller serving size. You could do that. Or maybe you can have a sugar-free cake, or maybe you can make your own cake with maybe some xylitol, So there are ways to do that. Fruit flavored yogurt, be careful because again, the fruit flavored yogurt's going to add some sugar to it. So I tend to do like a plain yogurt and then add, oh, my dog is choking over there, and then have a piece of fruit with it. There's actually a pretty good yogurt out there. It's called Too Good, TWO, and then good. You can get it at Publix. It's a Greek yogurt and it actually is fruit flavored and it only has 2 grams of sugar, which I like. Buttered popcorn. How about unbuttered popcorn? Remember, popcorn's a whole grain, so it's actually good for us, but then we put all the salt and butter on it, so be careful with that. Potato chips, you can do the baked chips. That might be a good alternative. Cookies, M&Ms, chocolate covered pretzels, you know, think about how you might change that a little bit. All right, so let's improve our choice of vegetables. So what vegetables do you think are the most commonly eaten in the United States? Potatoes and tomatoes are the most commonly consumed vegetables, accounting for 21 and 18% of all vegetable consumption. I do not count potatoes and tomatoes as vegetables. Actually, tomato is a fruit. Lettuce and onions are the only other vegetables that make up more than 5% of each total vegetable group consumption. So how sad is that? That's what we're eating: potatoes, tomatoes, lettuce, and onions. So is there any other vegetable you like? And you know what? Be adventurous. If you've never tried kale, try it. What's the worst that can happen? You don't like it. Okay, so try it. Green leafy vegetables, I think, are the best. Any kind of dark green vegetables, so even though broccoli is not leafy, it's still really, really good for us. And don't forget, fresh herbs count in this category. Fresh herbs are so healthy for us. So cook with them, put them in the salad, just eat them. They're so good for us. And then the next category are the red and orange vegetables. So the more colorful, the better. Add your legumes. That's a veggie. It's a starch, but it has really great fiber. And all the different colors of these beans actually also participate in health, especially heart health. And then if you are going to do a starch, you might as well do a starchy vegetable to kill two birds with one stone. So maybe have some lima beans, maybe have some green peas, have some butternut squash. And then not to say the rest of it good, like the lettuce and the onions. Of course, you can have all that too. But, not all vegetables are created equal. If you're not really into vegetables, I have some patients. I'm thinking about a patient right now. She's like, don't tell me to eat vegetables. I hate them. The only thing I'm going to have is lettuce. That's all she has. So I'm trying to coax her into, well, kind of trick yourself. Maybe just cook them into your food where you don't even taste them. So she's going to try that. You might want to juice them too. The only thing with juicing, be careful. If you're adding a lot of fruit, now you're adding a lot of calories and sugar. So you only want to use maybe an apple or a pear to sweeten it up a little bit. But if you're doing a nice beet and carrot juice, go for it. Maybe add some ginger and turmeric to really spice it up, different ways. Cook your vegetables differently than boiling or steaming. I mean, boiled spinach is disgusting. Ugh, who would want to eat that? So maybe sauteing it with a little bit of garlic, putting a little curry powder in there. Again, be adventurous. Add different spices to jazz it up. Now, of course, we would be remiss if we didn't mention a little bit about exercise. So, the guidelines do tell us we really do need to engage in at least 30 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity, especially for our health. If you want to lose weight, though, you got to do a little bit more than that. And you always want to incorporate as many different types of activity as you can. Remember, both the strength training, the resistance training, the aerobic, the anaerobic, the stretching, the yoga. So of course, Glen Eagles has the most amazing fitness center, and Karen and Jamie and all the trainers. So look to them for guidance. Absolutely. So I think out of all of this, what's the take home message? Make small but meaningful changes to your food choices. Don't try to do everything all in one day. Just set up what your goals are and, take baby steps. Incorporate more colorful vegetables. I think that's really important because veggies are just so good for us. Control your fruit intake. Fruit is good for us, but really control the serving. And of course, I always prefer some sort of whole fruit over juice because juice we tend to overdo. If you're going to do grains, or if you do grains, just make sure at least half of them are whole grains. Read the label, make sure it says 100% whole grain on the label, and try to choose different grains. I think next month we're going to talk about choosing different unique grains like farro and spelt and, amaranth and all those really unique ancient grains. It doesn't just have to be about wheat and rice. Again, be adventurous. Choose lower fat foods, in other words, low fat dairy. Choose your leaner meats. Reduce your sugar. First identify how much sugar you are actually eating and then make a meaningful cut. Be careful of caffeine. I know we didn't really talk about caffeine in this lecture, but we are overdoing some of our caffeine as well. And be careful of alcohol as well. Too much is not a good thing. Always watch your sodium. If you need to lose weight, just start setting your goals. If you're at a healthy weight, try to maintain it. And of course, you have to exercise and keep coming to my healthy lectures because they're a lot of fun. So I hope you enjoyed the lecture. I always love talking to you guys. If you have any questions, this is the time. Any questions for me? You can type it in the chat or take yourself off a mute. All right, you guys, if there are no questions, I really wish for you a very, very happy and healthy holiday and a happy new year. I'm wishing for everybody a fabulous, healthy 2021. It's got to be better than 2020. And thanks again for all your support and coming to the lectures. It's a lot of fun. And I look forward to doing it again in 2021.
Thank you so much, Lillian. Thank you
Thanks,
everyone
you
for joining us.
guys. Have a great night.
Thanks, you too.